folks will get their seats, we're going to go ahead and get started. Apologize for the lateness, but we'll try to get through this fairly quick clip. Senator Chesterfield, do you push your button? You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm concerned about our order as we go forward. One of the things that is concerns me is we took a vote, perhaps you can remind me of that vote, on managed care at one of our meetings, and I see it on the agenda for today. Could you tell me how that ties in with the vote that we took prior to this to pursue funds that would equal the amount that the governor said we needed without going to managed care? How's that playing out?
Okay. Well, let me address that in just a minute, because I got a few comments I want to make about what we're going to be doing here, and we'll hopefully answer some of your questions there, because we are at the point where it's time to make some decisions, and I want everyone to be clear on what decisions we're making and how we got here. And if you all were to call back to about a year ago when this task force began, the chairs made a presentation. One of the things we encouraged people to do was not get ahead of ourselves, to define the problem, to get the information, and then proceed forward with making some decisions. And I think we've spent about a year doing that. And I want to just tell all the members of the task force, I appreciate your diligence over the last year working towards the point where we are today, and I want to thank the Stevens Group for their effort, because we are at the point where it's time to make some decisions. And I'll explain some of the process and specifically your question in just a minute, Senator Chesterfield, because it is decision time, and it is some decisions that have a lot of impact on the people of Arkansas and the people who have some serious health concerns and health needs, and hopefully we'll do what's right for everybody. My hope is that at the end of this we'll have charted our path forward, and we'll realize that we still have much work to do. With regard to your process, one of the things that I think we have to be clear on, and Senator Chesterfield, you especially know, because we spent a year previous to this on another task force, and we went through much of a similar process, which was trying to bring us to a point where this body could formally act on recommendations. And those recommendations have absolutely no bearing on what the legislature can or cannot do. They are simply recommendations. We've done that in other task force, and we're doing it today. Any motions, any paths, any discussions that we've had previous to this have gotten us to this point today where we are going to consider recommendations. And if you all recall at the last meeting, I asked all members, if you have a recommendation that you want considered, send it to the staff so we can send it out with our summary of recommendations a week prior to our meeting today, which that list went out March the 2nd. We were about a day late because there were so many. And there is absolutely no recommendation that we would have not accepted through that process. And obviously, because the point was to allow members to have time to see what it was. These are big decisions, and what it was we were going to be asked to make decisions on, rather than just showing up and throwing stuff out there. So we have had those recommendations that have come from some from the Stevens Group, which you all know in the part 3 of our packet. There's over 20 of those recommendations, some from the governor, some from some members of this task force. And the point, that's where we are today, is to make a decision on those recommendations. Specifically with regard to your request or your question about a motion to achieve the savings and not be necessary to have managed care. We can have the staff necessarily go back and pull the motions and the ideas. My recollection to the motion was to accept the governor's recommendation that if we were going to continue with the Medicaid expansion program, we would identify at least $835 million in savings to pay
without managed care.
He proposed managed care, and he also said, to my recollection, and I can tell you that I said specifically, the issue was not, at that point, whether it was managed care or whether it was not managed care. It was mathematics, that if we are going to continue to have Medicaid expansion, we had to find a way to pay for the general revenue portion of our cost-sharing component. And that was the purpose of our task force, and the Stevens Group was our consultants in doing that, was what is the best way to do that. And I will also say, I think the fact that we said that we agree that, and really the task force recommendation was that we cannot continue Medicaid expansion if we cannot meet that general revenue obligation, does not mean that that's the only reform that we would consider with regard to traditional Medicaid. In fact, to us, to many, it was a minimum, that as a minimum, you have to be able to pay for the hole that is created in our budget because of the general revenue cost sharing requirements that are going to be necessary. But that does not mean that if our consultants bring to us procedures and recommendations that have been done in other states, and they say this is the best practice and it will produce more than $835 million, that we would not consider those things. And again, I'm not advocating for one or against the other. The only thing I'm telling you, what we have arrived at today are recommendations from our consultants, recommendations from task force members, and recommendations, some that have incorporated some of the governor's desires.
May I respond to you?
Absolutely.
There were two motions made. Motion one is that we would authorize the governor to go to Secretary Burwell and ask for the waivers. That was a motion that passed unanimously.
That's correct.
The second motion was that we would ask the Stevens Group to do research to find out how we could achieve savings without managed care. Those were not just discussions, those were motions that were made, and they were both passed unanimously by this body, which is why they have brought us the recommendations that they have brought us. We are now back to discussing what I thought was settled when we made the motion about not managed care. And if we don't have that settled, may I see the motion that as it was printed, because I'm the one who made the motion. And so what you're saying to me in essence is, that was fine then, but it's not a motion now. Is that what you're telling me?
What I'm saying was, and I was a supporter of the motion, and the case was after the presentation was made on Diamond Care, there was a request that we ask our consultants to do a no-kidding actuarial study to see if the same type of savings and to utilize their resources, the same type of savings could be utilized or realized through traditional managed fee-for-service type of an approach. And this task force did vote unanimously to say any recommendation of any task force member is going to be given serious consideration, including authorizing our consultants to go and report back, which they did. But I don't think in any way.
That wasn't a motion, Mr. Chair, that is your.
All right, let's go ahead and ask the staff to pull the
But I am
motion.
not gonna challenge the chair, but that was not the motion. If you would just read my motion,
Do you have the motion there?
it should be in a minute somewhere.
All right, let's ask the staff, if you'll go pull those two motions from the meeting regarding, that was, what date was that?
I slept since then.
That was the meeting that, some of you guys back in the audience, probably, when you get it pulled up, let us know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I
We will
appreciate your
get the
indulgence.
motions and read those, and then we will, again, December 16th and 17th, we're going to try to pull those minutes up.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And while we're waiting for those to be pulled up, again, let me tell you what the process is going to be today. We have, again, all of the recommendations that have been submitted by the groups that we just discussed. And we're going to take action on those today. There have been requests today to combine motions, to change agenda items, and to do different things. The fact is that I don't support that. I think the whole process of having this agenda published and having these things in your hands a week early was so that we could have an opportunity to know what we're going to be asked to vote on. But that doesn't mean that it's not up to me. With a 2/3 vote, we can change the agenda. Y'all can do whatever you want. I would say that we need to proceed through what has been published, what has been out in everybody's hands since March the 2nd, and act on these items. If we do not take action, we are rapidly approaching the point when any future program is not going to be possible just because of the timing of it. So we will give it just a minute to see if we can pull up those motions and answer Senator Chesterfield's questions, and then we will proceed with item G.
If you can make this one more thing. And if we cannot find it, I would ask that you would vote on the managed care piece first.
Okay, let's read the motions first. Let's do one item at a time here. Senator Reagan, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would appreciate a point of personal privilege here, since we are waiting on these to find the minutes of the meeting. The Arkansas Health Care Reform Task Force was made up of members of the legislature, and it was charged with making a recommendation regarding the renewal of the private option and other Medicaid-related services. As this process moved forward, I have been increasingly concerned about the influence emanating from the executive branch, especially in regards to managed care. It was envisioned the task force would be allowed to complete its mission and submit it to the governor. Our charge would then be complete, and the governor would be free to do with our hours of diligent, hard work as he saw fit. Apprehension began when the governor chose to negotiate with long-term care outside the purview of this committee. An agreement was struck with the nursing home industry, but it was months before this committee was made aware of the details. Subsequently, our consultants verified the proposal and advised the task force that the plan met the savings criteria sought by the governor. I might add, this agreement was done without implementation of managed care. As we come to the end of this long, complex, and arduous task, a feeling shared by many is that the governor has already decided his course of action regardless of the task force recommendations. So it comes as no surprise that many of us have heard rumblings that advisors, that members of this task force have sought out for their expertise have been made to feel if they don't acquiesce to the governor's plan, any current or future business with the state could be put in jeopardy. If this is in the fact the case, then I'm truly disappointed. Any agency, any corporation, any nonprofit, any state employee should never fear sharing their insight with members of the legislature without fear of reprisal. We have already experienced one member resign in outright frustration. My true hope is that this task force will be instrumental in passing Arkansas Works. My great fear is that even if it's just perception, not allowing the task force the independence to conduct its due diligence, it has needlessly created discord that this legislature can ill afford. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anybody else have any point of privileges they'd like to take while we wait? All right, Representative Hammer, you're recognized. Push your button there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will only say what should be spoken as a matter of personal privilege and not speaking to a motion that has not yet been made. But as an independent member of this legislature, I've been open-minded to everything that's been said, and I want information from all sources in order to make an intelligent, thought-out, and well-understood decision. Thank you.
Okay, while we're waiting, one item we did have to clean up from the last meeting was an appointment of an HDC subcommittee to go and look at some things. And obviously we haven't, they have really been set out of this, but everything deserves a look. So we're going to do that. We've asked some folks to volunteer. Senator Raper's agreed to lead that up with Senator Bismay on the Senate side, and Representative Hammer and Representative Ferguson on the House side. We appreciate you all willing to do that,
So
really.
the co-chairs of that will be Senator Raper and Representative Hammer.
Here, let me just read the motion, Senator Chesterfield. Senator Chesterfield made the following motion. This is from the minutes of December 16, 2015. The Health Reform Task Force moves to task TSG to assist the task force to find at least $835 million in savings without managed care, with the exception of dental. Senator Hendren seconded this motion and stated there will be further discussion of this issue with input from TSG. Mr. Stevens said TSG will be able to fully comply with this request. The motion carried. Senator Hendren stated that TSG will present this report at the January 2016 task force meeting.
What about my request to have MCO voted on?
Are you making a motion to suspend the agenda and change the order?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Members, this requires a 2/3 vote, and we will call roll.
Senator,
What's that?
What constitutes 2/3 of this form?
Is that
All members present.
11? And before we have the vote, does anyone want to speak for or against the motion? Everybody understand what we're doing, which is to suspend the motion, to change, or to suspend the rules so that we can change the order of the agenda to consider managed care prior to Arkansas Works. And, okay, you've heard how I think about it.
Senator Chesterfield.
Aye.
Senator Raper. No. Senator Dismain. Senator Ingram. Aye. Senator Sanders. Senator Cooper. Representative Hammer. Representative Meeks.
Yes.
Representative Farrar. Representative Ferguson. Representative Gray. Representative Boyd. House Vice Chair Murdoch. House Chair Collins. Senate Vice Chair Bledsoe. Senate Chair Hendren.
Okay, the motion's not adopted. All right, members, we're going to continue on with item G, which is Arkansas Works. What I'm going to ask is, I think most members have pretty familiar. If you look on page 19 of your packet, can you advance that slide 1 up there? This is the motion that was sent out in your packets, and so everyone should have had an opportunity to review it. It is somewhat general in nature. I'm going to read it just so everybody is clear what we're going to be voting on. The task force accepts the budget analysis presented on February 17, 2016, and in previous task force meetings, that continuing the current health care independence program will result in a substantial increase in state Medicaid and uncompensated care expenditures over the next 4 years, and thereby further recommends that the legislature consider the governor's Arkansas Works proposals as presented to the task force on February 17, 2016. We hereby request that the governor present legislation to be considered during a special session. Are there any questions about the motion or the contents of the motion? Representative Hammer, you recognize?
Point of clarification, by voting for this motion, we are basically giving with staff and the governor permission to go forward and framework what will become the official piece of legislation that will be voted on in a special session. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. In fact, the reason we have a meeting also scheduled for the end of this month is that the task force will then be able to review the legislation that the OR drafts based on this guidance.
And so the opportunity to give input in that final piece, the door is still open even though we vote for this to go forward. While that piece of legislation is crafted, opportunity to give input will still be available to this task force and members of the legislature. Is that correct?
Yes, and for things like triggers and what do the triggers look like and things of that nature, along with other forms of input, the answer is yes.
Thank you.
And let me just also say, for the members of this task force, the opportunity to have input on this is not going to stop until this, if there is legislation that passes both houses of the General Assembly. So all we're looking at is a general recommendation. This will still have to then go through the normal committee process. It'll come to the floor of the House. It'll be subject to amendments by any group of members that want to do so. So all this does is basically say we want to now turn this guidance, this general guidance, into legislation that we can then begin to debate and discuss. Thank you. Representative Gray, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on the email that I had sent back out about clarity about whether or not this motion does contain anything that has to do with managed care.
For the record, as I said in the email, I see managed care nowhere in the motion. There is nothing in my understanding of Arkansas Works that includes managed care. Managed care and the direction of how we deal with traditional Medicaid specifically will be addressed in the next agenda item. But to say that Arkansas Works in any way requires or excludes managed care, I think is a misunderstanding of what we're doing with the motion. This motion has to do with processing a path forward with Medicaid expansion. Okay? Any other questions? Anyone want to speak for or against the motion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. All right, call the roll. I heard two voices, so.
Senator Chastity Goodwin.
Abstain?
Senator Raker. Senator Disman. Senator Ingram. Senator Ingram. Senator Sanders.
Yes.
Senator Kirkland. Representative Hammer.
Yes.
Representative Meeks. No. Representative Farrar. Yes. Representative Ferguson. Representative Gray. Representative Gray. Representative Boyd.
Yes.
Vice Chair Morgan.
Yes.
House Chair Collins.
Yes.
Senate Vice Chair Bledsoe. Senate Chair Henry.
By a vote of 11 ayes, 2 nays, and 3 not voting, you have passed the motion. Okay, we're going to proceed on to the next item on the agenda. If you flip the slide forward there one more time. Members, let me tell you the process on this, because this is somewhat unusual. We have really 2 competing proposals, and Senator Ingram, just for the record, is withdrawing his proposal. So if you look up there on the slide, which was, again, mailed out, we have Proposal 1, that's page 20 on your packet there. Proposal 2 and Proposal 3, if you've got a pencil, please just line through Proposal number 2. We're going to be considering whether or not we will accept the recommendation 1 or 3. Okay? I've asked the Stevens Group to give a brief summary of both 1 and 3. Then we'll ask Representative Gray to speak to item 3, since it is a recommendation that her and some of her colleagues brought forward, to make sure that it's fully explained and questions are answered. So after a description and questions are answered on item 1 and item 3, I will be asking the members of the task force to select one or the other. And I guess, or you can say none of the above if you choose. But we will have a roll call vote, and you will be asked to identify whether you support recommendation 1 or recommendation 3. Okay? Representative Meeks, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, so there's no way that we can vote on both of them and then try to come up with a hybrid
I think,
of the two? Is that not possible?
not today.
Because I like aspects of both of them, I just
Again, here's what I would say, the same thing we said in the with regard to Arkansas Works. I will be shocked if the legislature doesn't modify a lot of what this task force recommends. That's the legislative process. All we're trying to do is establish some benchmarks and some guidelines for us to navigate between. So, but I think right now we're talking about billions of dollars here, to try to, on the fly, mix and match is probably going to be difficult to do.
Thank you.
Okay, so, John, you're recognized, you and your team and welcome, I'm glad your flight got you in here before the action was over, so.
Thank you.
I know you would have made it to this. You're recognized.
It was Boston, it wasn't anything around here. Thank you very much. I just want to go through the number two, I guess is off the list, and I'm just going to stick to the governor's proposal and to Diamond Care. So the first slide here is just showing you the difference between program features. So we've already talked about the long-term care industry plan has been accepted by the governor. We did look at it, and we do believe it would achieve the savings. If it was, again, with the trigger and with some of the other, that's why some of the related provisions are really important. Diamond Care has that as well. The second is the development disability non-HDC. The governor has it in capitated managed care and the managed fee-for-services in Diamond Care, which is an ACO, not a full risk model. And the differences between the two is really a few things. The managed care capitated will develop the network, will accept full risk, will receive a payment of a per member per month, which is capped at a level, and they handle all the services for that individual. Versus administrative, managed fee-for-service entity has some risk. It's an administrative contract. Claims are still paid by the state, whereas claims are paid by the managed care companies. The administrative contract also does the independent assessments though. They do the plan of care, so you have a lot of the similar qualities. And again, we'll talk later about some of the savings estimates and how we arrived at it. But it does, the managed fee-for-service does not do the network development, does not do a lot of the credentialing, the same type of things you usually hear about managed care. The behavioral health would be capitated, and it would be, again, managed fee-for-service, administrative in the Diamond Care proposal. The HDCs are exempted here, but I will note that the members of the committee that have set up, the committee that Senator Rayford and Representative Hammer are chairing, that committee is charged with looking at the HDC centers to see where they fit within some of the savings plan as well. So I don't want anyone to have the impression that your recommendation is that they're exempted. The prescription drugs, the savings in the programs that the governor has mentioned in his proposal are incorporated into the DE and the behavioral health, so that managed care is handling prescription drugs, pharmacy in those capitated models. In the managed fee-for-service, pharmacy would stay the same as it is today with those populations, and you'd still have your PDL, and the state would be managing it with the vendor here. Dental, you've already pretty much agreed early on in the meeting that would be a capitated full risk model, so that would be included in both scenarios. Administrative savings, there would be reduced savings in both scenarios. In the fee-for-service as well as managed care, there's employees at the Department of Human Services that do some of the same functions, and those functions would have to be looked at, and we do recommend a certain cost estimate that we looked at for positions that would be streamlined. Administrative costs, the administrative cost for managed care is mostly in the technology. There would have to be some additional technology costs by sake of actually transferring contracts and transferring functions. There's going to be a lot of upgrade technology costs. We did a ballpark of what we thought. We spoke to the department, and they seem to agree with those numbers. The managed fee-for-service would have those technology costs, but there would also be some administrative costs, more costs at the department level. In both of those scenarios, you're going to need to have a question that's going to be faced with the department. And the challenge is the administrative support that DHS needs to make this succeed. No matter what model today, DHS has to have the resources to make it work. If they're not given the resources, this will fail. There's no question in our mind. Under managed fee for service, there's a lot more complexities in the number of contracts you need to manage, but the number of staff may be similar on the administrative costs. But if you manage care, you're still gonna need higher vendor management and contract and legal. And when McKinsey was with the department, McKinsey looked at upwards to 45 new employees. They said 25 to 45 in the managed care world, if they went to managed care. We have modeled it on the 45 high end. And in the managed fee for service, we still think those resources have to be there on that high end for it to work. The premium tax would apply in the dental, their premium tax, and then the capitated payments for any managed care. What is included also is the governor had requested relief for the DD wait list, and one of the questions that you have before you is that any premium tax, there's a question that that premium tax will be dedicated to the development disability wait list if you were to vote for managed care. So that's one of the options on the table. But there is no premium tax with the managed fee for service. And the amounts, I'll go through as far as the savings. These are the estimated amounts based on our model. The governor's numbers here are pretty much representative of what we had told you at the last meeting, comparing our model. And the reason why our model is higher in savings, and some of you have asked, is because we don't necessarily, on the managed care model that we did compare, we did not exempt the long-term care waiver and community services. So that's why that's a higher number in our saving estimate versus the governor's. The managed fee for service estimate is, as you can see through those savings, some of these numbers, and this is where, and I just want to make sure, it's the best estimate we can give you. I can't sit here and tell you that it's going to be exactly these numbers. Both models will achieve savings. Both models are better than what you have today. Both models have enhanced management capabilities that the department needs to make sure in the high-cost population, which you all know now from the analysis, needs to be managed. And the reason that the savings in the capitated managed care are higher is based on the experiences across the country that we looked at and we shared with you. And that through prior meetings, we've given you a lot of information. We've looked at Pennsylvania, we've looked at Louisiana, we've looked at Tennessee, we've looked at a number of states. And there is no state to this day that I can find that has had a higher amount of savings on the managed fee for service versus the capitated managed care that we can find. So that's what this model is. We can answer any questions. Mr. Chair.
Okay, we got one right now from Senator Chesterfield. You recognize him?
And before I do that, Senator, can I just add one more? I forgot the general fund component. Senator Dismay, you had asked about general fund. I know that was a great question. The nursing home component is different here because of your bed tax. And so the amount that goes back in the general fund is much less in terms of the savings for the nursing home component. Actually, it's higher on the nursing home end. So you're not going to get higher general fund in the nursing home. You're going to get higher general fund in the community programs. Excuse me, the other way around. So the community programs have your 30% match. The nursing homes, it's a 16.28% match because of that bed tax. So you need to take that in consideration. Understand general fund's important to you all. That's why we broke it down for you to see. Sorry, Senator.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me, and thank you, John, for taking my question. One of the major issues that has faced us is the fact that we don't have the oversight that I think we ought to have when we're dealing with state's money, whether we go to 1 or 3. And what I'm finding missing, perhaps in both of them, is biannual review. The role that the state will play should we find out that the company that we use does not do us well. How do we get to that point? Because I am very much concerned that we bring in people we don't know, perhaps. Maybe everybody else knows them, I just don't know them. I'm just a little country girl from Arkansas. But we bring these folks in, and we have brought in folks before, and they have not done us well, and we have had nothing in place that would say to the people of the state of Arkansas, we have been good stewards of your money. So how do we write into that biannual review of what they're doing? And I suggest biannual review, because I think every 6 months you ought to be checking on how folks are spending your money. Perhaps quarterly is just a little bit too regular. How do we get to that? How do we come back and say this has not worked well? How long are these contracts supposed to be, so that when we're looking at this stuff, and a lot of us will be gone, because we are term limited here in the state of Arkansas. How can we then make sure that the legacy we leave behind will not be one where the people of Arkansas have been taken advantage of?
So this is a great question, and it's at the center of really, I think, responsibility, and you need to stay involved. And here's how I answer this. States use different models in managing the managed care companies or the managed fee-for-service companies. And what I see the best practice is the Department of Human Services is going to require in the contract financial reporting from these companies. And it's going to be on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, and it's all the claims, and they call it encounter data, that they're going to review. And they're going to have their own set of attorneys and vendor management at the department. And what I would suggest, Senator, is the best practice is when a legislative committee, and it could be this committee, long after we're gone, this committee needs to stay involved, or something like it, to make sure that you are holding, if it's managed care, the managed care company's feet to the fire. If it's managed fee for service, the companies that are doing the MFFS feet to the fire. And that's the best practice that we see. We see it mostly on a quarterly basis. In states like, for example, in Texas, they have a committee that reviews, legislative committee that reviews reports from what's called the Health and Human Service Commission, has them testify. There are states like Kentucky that has the managed care companies report dashboards to the legislature. Has breast and cervical cancer screening gone up this month? They even do it sometimes on a monthly dashboard. If things start to go down in terms of, Senator Murdoch asked about access, and I checked into that. If access begins to go down at the lower level, the legislature is asking the managed care companies, what has happened in this area in the state in the last few months? We want to know. We want answers. They come and testify in front of the legislature, not just the department. So what I'm saying to you is the best practice is you don't want to pass anything, even if it's MFFS, managed fee for service, and walk away and say, we'll just watch it from afar. Because you're going to be back in a year or 2 years trying to be reactive. In order to be proactive and to make sure, again, population health, we saw early on, is so important in this state. You just had the most recent population health data, shows you again at the bottom, or near the bottom, on so many indicators. Well, make those companies go out there and prove to you that they've actually done their job and got paid for what the value that they're supposed to bring. And don't just take the DHS word for it. And that's why, no matter how much you debate here, whatever you put together, I believe strongly, and we've talked about this, that you have got to stay, or someone here has to take an active interest in what happens in the future here. By quarterly, I would say quarterly reporting. And we can put that in legislation, and some states actually define that in legislation, along with the benchmarks that they want.
So you told me about the financial review and the necessity. I'll go with the quarterly. I think it's better than the biannual. But I wanted to have it more often than we have been doing it in the past in this state. I think that's critical. When we get to the individuals whose voices often are not heard, and for whom these services are supposed to be critical, what is written into legislation that gives them that voice, that allows us to know that while the finances are in good shape, the services that we are receiving are abysmal? How is that put into play as far as writing this so that it is in the best interest of the people who are supposed to receive it?
So again, there are two issues, and this is why I keep saying the contracts are so important. No matter which road you go down, I would make sure the contract language requires consumer satisfaction requirements. Most states have good benchmark for consumer satisfaction. Call center, how much time did it take you to return the calls to the consumers that call at the line that the managed care companies give, or the managed fee-for-service company will give? prior authorization, how quickly you are resolving issues regarding authorization grievances that are filed. So those are common areas in every single state that goes down this road. And the benefit that you all have is to look at, again, what has gone wrong and make sure that your contract and your process benefits from all the stuff in the past.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hammer, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may or may not have seen it earlier with Lieutenant Governor Griffin's report coming out. You mentioned about I'll call it a staffing up of DHS in order to help bring the expertise. And that, what I heard you say was either for the managed care contract or if we go ASO, either one, that there could be some expectation. Do you know, are you at liberty to be able to say whether or not, if we go with the realignments that are proposed by Lieutenant Griffin, that we could maybe minimize some of that through the realignments that would come to DHS?
I mean, I haven't seen the proposal, but I believe, and I know the director of Gillespie, Richard and I met with last week, really had a great meeting, and I think that she understands that the first thing to look at is where in the department or in the state are there redundant services or other services that may not be rendering the value we need, and repurpose. So every state looks at this and they move down this road. The first question should be, what can we repurpose before we go back and add new FTEs? But I just think that with your salary levels and with the competency that you need to bring to the table here to manage this, and you're talking about whatever billion-dollar savings in the span of 5 years, and your administrative line item in your Medicaid budget is about 2.5% to 3%. You're not talking about a lot in terms of the whole global picture here. So, you know, you need to give them the tools, but the first question is, I would want to see that realignment, and I think that's a good thing to look at first, repurposing.
Okay, and then the second thing is, the focus on managed care and out-of-state companies. Do we have, to your knowledge, anybody in-state managed care company that could take on this kind of a project?
Blue Cross, we met with the Blue Cross folks here that are interested, and they would be able to compete
And is
in
it
that
fair,
market.
and is it fair to say that if we go the ASO model, that unless it's gonna be written as a sole source contract, that could be bid on competitively nationwide, so we may actually be dealing with an ASO company that's out of state? Is that a possible reality
Well,
or not?
first and foremost, whether you do the ASO, which is another word, managed fee for services, is administered by an administrative service organization, similar. If you go down that road, or you go down the road of managed care, CMS is gonna require a competitive bid. So it is not an issue. You're gonna have to do a competitive bid, period.
But either way, we could be dealing with an in-state company or out-of-state company, so if that's a fear factor, it's maybe not a real fear factor, because we don't know who's gonna win the bid until the bid is put out there. Is that a fair?
You don't know who's gonna win the bid. I can tell you from the experiences in every state I've seen, the in-state resources are used by the vendors when they come into a state. So,
Either way.
either way.
Okay, thank you.
This is the only way they can succeed.
Thank you.
Representative Ferguson, you recognized.
There, thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the earlier numbers for the increase, almost a third increase in the projections of what Arkansas Works will save toward the 10% match, I guess I was wondering, whether we do the governor's managed care or we do Diamond Care, there's going to be significant money, according to your numbers, above what the 10% match will be. Is that right?
For the time period that we're looking at, the 70-21 time period, that is absolutely the case.
I guess I'm wondering, is there some way that we could, as a committee, recommend that money that's above the 10% match, I would like to see it stay in healthcare, in DHS at least, where couldn't that money be used to help match the DD wait list and some provider reimbursement and other things? I just hate for that additional savings to go into general revenue and not go toward anything in Medicaid or healthcare. Is that feasible? I mean, how much are we looking at above?
We haven't estimated that difference, but that would just be a policy decision to the budget.
But like there will be some significant savings with either plan above the 10% match.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Urban, you recognize?
Thank you. On, I just want some clarification on the, if you do the governor's recommendation, it says including medical, and then would you continue down the path with ADHD episode, or would that be brought into the managed care realm? Seems like you're duplicating there.
That assumes that the episodes would stay within the DCMH, children in lower cost populations, the way it is today.
So, okay, so my question, so then children that are maybe under PCMH that have not severe ADHD, ADD, that they would not be in managed care. Is that what
The
you're saying?
state, in this scenario, and there's a related question on the behavioral health changes, the CANS assessment and the assessments. The independent assessment, there would be a trigger that the state would set, and that could be set through the contracting and the RFP process as well.
Okay.
But the trigger would then dictate how that individual is placed, whether that individual becomes part of the managed care. So if your question is, can they be transferred into the managed care program? Absolutely. But it would have to meet that trigger.
We have to meet a certain
Severity
threshold.
of mental health concern
Okay.
and disease.
Thank
yes.
you.
All right, Representative Michael Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your indulgence as I'm not a member of the task force. And Mr. Stephen, respectfully, your statement that which direction the task force decides to go, whether it be a managed fee-for-service model or a managed care ration type model, what your thought process is that our current structure in Arkansas or with the DHS or with our oversight, are we currently capable of managing the contracts or overseeing regardless of which direction the task force recommends or ultimately the legislature decides to go?
With the right resources, you can do it. And you have very competent people, but you also have had real problems that we've seen with the way you contracted. And your whole, the performance-based model that needs to be in place, whether you're in managed fee-for-service or capitated managed care. It's something Senator Sanders, I think one of the first meetings talked about performance management. And we looked at it, and Martha from my team looked at the way you guys have contracted in the past. They have brought better people to the table, and the Gardner process now is starting to really prove that the department is looking more serious at how they contract. But what we've recommended, if you go down either way, you absolutely have to beef up your vendor management there. They need more legal services. They need to, and if you're in the managed fee-for-service, you're talking about a risk-based system for providers across the table. So now instead of Medicaid provider agreements, you're talking about holding back rates potentially if they don't meet benchmark savings. Think of how much work that took in episodes of care. So you're going to have folks to manage all that. And you don't have that today.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir. So I guess my question would be, do you have, in your recommendations, do you have specific suggestions for us? And if you do or do not, wouldn't it be prudent for us to, as a state, as a legislature, to look at the restructure and the ability to enforce contracts of this size or to administer programs of this size before we ultimately made a decision about reform that we may or may not be able to implement?
I mean, that's your decision.
Okay, all right, if I can just interject here a minute. I know we got a lot of guests here today, and we've got 25 other recommendations after this major decision here. So I am going to ask the members, particularly those not on the task force, one quick question, because we've hashed through this stuff for a year now, and a lot of this stuff we've already covered. So again, go ahead and make a quick response to that, but then I'm going to go ahead and recognize members not on the task force, but I'm going to ask you to please make it brief so that we can get on with the work.
I mean, just if I can really quickly, I mean, we put into our model an 18-month take-up on a managed fee-for-service and a 2-year take-up for managed care. There is no state that I've worked in that can't put this together in a 2-year time period. I would do it now, make the decision, because every time you wait, every day you wait, you continue to lose the ability to coordinate the care of these individuals that need care management.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Dismayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just real quick, if you don't mind, and it's just in regards to Representative Ferguson's question about the 10%, and if we're in excess of the 10%, what do we need the rest of the savings for? I mean, I know that's not exactly how you worked it, but I think that was kind of the gist of it. And it's one thing that I'd like to address, there's truly two separate train tracks in our discussion right now. One in regards to the expansion of Arkansas Works, and one in regard to our traditional Medicaid program that we have right now. The existing program that we have right now is facing a shortfall, or actually an increased need of state revenue spending on the state side because of the change in our FMAP rate and the fact that we're doing better as a state. If all services held flat today, I'm probably not saying anything you don't know, but held flat today, we would still have to spend more on the state level because of that FMAP rate change. And so I think that is what really creates the need to have these additional savings in place. And generally, you can say that there are good things to do, regardless of what your opinion on it, which plan. But one thing I want to ask, I guess, really, because I think we've danced around a lot and we're asking a lot of specific questions about can we do this, can we do that. Today is just, and it's really, you agree, today's just the starting point for this process in a way. We're establishing a very broad framework of how we would like to transition our current Medicaid program with that traditional population in our Medicaid, or high-cost population. When we write the RFP, when we change the legislation, when we do a number of other actions that are going to be required to institute this change, there's going to be a signature that each and every one of us can put on that. That may be in regards to, we want to have more oversight, we want to have, a greater focus on the progression of the individual in an ED population, or however we want to, we can model our payments in a bunch of different ways, and there's going to be a lot more discussion moving past today.
I think that's a great statement, and I would agree 110%. And at the end of the day, this task force has been working for a number of months now. We've been digging into the data. We've been doing a lot of analysis, and I think it's achieved a great purpose. And so the opportunity here is to do what's best for Arkansas, so that you're not sitting here 3, 4, 5 years down the road with a major problem, and you have to somehow start cutting individuals' care. And this is to improve the care and bring greater quality. And that's why Senator Chesterfield's question is so important, to stay involved at the legislative end, in our opinion. Because if the quality starts to be compromised, and if issues start to be impacted on rates and other things, you want to know about it right away. And if you're the state that does that, that's not micromanaging. That's just making sure the outcome management system is working in your state. So I can't agree with you more.
Okay, Representative Boyd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be pretty quick. So either plan, in essence, we've got a managed care plan and we've got the managed fee-for-service plan. The managed care plan is a hybrid model which came forward through your initial Stephen Group report. And then the managed fee-for-service plan also came forward. Now, we maybe made Representative Gray and Ferguson, we maybe made some tweaks, but that really came from the patient-centered medical home approach. So both of those models really were in your initial report that this task force authorized the funds to pay for, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Elliott, you're recognized.
So I'll try to demonstrate brief. Mr. Stephen, if this has already happened, you can just tell me, we'll talk offline. But I was just wondering regarding managed care. I am real familiar with discussions about how satisfied everybody is except the customers themselves. Are there some studies in some states that will give us that kind of information so that we would know how to study a model where the actual patients are very satisfied with managed care?
Yeah, we can get that for you. We can get you some. We've given you a number of studies more on the savings side. So Representative, if you really ask a good question on the patient side, Representative Eddie Edwards had asked through, I believe Senator Dismayne, to have us look at the state of Kentucky, because the state of Kentucky has gone through a really tough period in managed care in 2013, and we're pretty much almost finished with our report. We actually contacted individuals in Kentucky. We've talked to medical society, we've talked to individual providers, and we're gonna be presenting our own independent analysis for you. And Kentucky's a pretty good state to look at, because they do have managed care today, but they did just what we're talking about here. They made the contract enhanced to really help the customer. They enhanced a lot of the process that they did not have in place in 2012 and 13. So, there's a report on the state of Kentucky that we're using. I'll share that with you, and we'll find some other reports to talk about other, customer issues. And
Okay, that's fine.
yeah, and there's issues of concern by many of the states and people. You're gonna see some, if we find some, reports, you're gonna see that, again, I think we've said this is not a panacea. There's gonna be some issues. And you just need to make sure you manage it well, and that's all. But yeah, we'll do our best to get you as much as we can.
We expect to have that before legislatively, or, Mr. Chair, I guess that's you, we expect to have that report before we
Well,
vote on legislation.
I mean, we're having a meeting the 29th, I think, of this month.
Yeah, we can have a bunch of, sources for you by then.
All right, thank you.
Representative Flowers, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will be brief, but what I'm saying, I've said before, and I just want it to be something that people are mindful of, especially, well, not only as a vote is taken today on this task force, but as we move forward and legislation is crafted and these policies begin to take shape as something that will really become something that the full body will actually vote on and that will become law. And that is that last year, when we talked about this and this task force was formed and all the discussions were beginning, we talked about healthcare reform. And a lot of the considerations that were made about healthcare reform were not only rooted in Medicaid and spending, but also quality of care and health outcomes and where we are. We all know in this room that Arkansas is 50th in terms of the state of our health, of our people. And as we think about the people and those folks we represent, all of us in this room, at least as members of the legislature, I would be remiss if I didn't mention and remember and represent the issues of the people who are affected by this as patients, but even the stakeholders. Many of the stakeholders serve on the Governor's Advisory Council, which I'm also a member. We've had several meetings. The last meeting that we had, there were several stakeholders around that table in a discussion about fee-for-service and about managed care, and overwhelming majority of those folks had extreme reservations and took a straw poll and were against managed care. That's the Governor's Advisory Council. They represent stakeholders, they represent patients, and I don't think their voices should be forgotten as we move forward. I just wanted to make that statement, and I hope that that's something that we will really, really think about, but not only think about, but we will take action on and engage the people who will be most affected by what we do today and moving forward. Thank you.
Representative Warnock, you recognize. You're done. That's all I have in the queue. Representative Collins.
One of the things I understand that we've got between these two options, John, is the potential for the greater savings with option one, which opens the door, if we bend the cost curve a little bit more, to be able to attack the DD wait list. And that the prospects, from a financial perspective, are encouraging that with that extra savings, we would be able to tackle some of that DD wait list, whereas with the other option, the prospects are not nearly as bright that we could tackle that. So is that part of your thought process as well?
Yeah, absolutely, due to the premium tax. I think I've said that in prior meetings. And what I would suggest is, other states have not done this, is that premium tax you may want to have dedicated if you go down that road to the development disability wait list and other provider rate increases that are really low in this state. And Senator Irwin, we're doing an analysis to compare rates, so hopefully by the end of the next meeting we'll have some better comparison. But there are some rates that are pretty close to other states, or other rates that really need to be looked at. And where are you going to get the revenue to really make sure that community-based access happens the way your vision is? How are you going to end up helping those on the wait list that have been there since 2007 without really meaningful savings? And that's why I think that the premium tax, Representative Collins, becomes a big issue if you want to do it, and that's sort of what I believe the governor was alluding to as well. In the states that I've been looking at, Kansas was a state that came to mind that used some of their revenue and matched it with federal savings. I think it was somewhere around $40 million they put aside, and they were able to get another $120 million or so from the federal match for the waitlist populations.
Okay. Senator Chesterfield, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What are we doing going forward? We discussed it, I think everybody about knows where they stand on this issue. Could you tell me then how we're proceeding? Are we proceeding taking votes on each singularly? Are we voting on them simultaneously? What is the will of the chair?
We are going to do a roll call, and as I said, since there's only two to select from, each member is going, and I'll clear that up here, we'll select option 1 or option 3, which are the two that are available. And then,
So we're just gonna vote it, when you call for the motion, I need to vote option 15 instead of option 12.
yeah, or,
I got 3 and 4.
we'll get to that. Right, we'll make it clear, but yeah, hopefully we can, again, we'll just see how it shakes out, but you're gonna be asked to select one of the two, because you really can't approve both of them because they're mutually exclusive.
And if we say neither one of them.
You can say none of the above, it's certainly not unprecedented. Senator Irvin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure too, though, when we're discussing the premium tax, that it needs to be very, very clear that we're getting X amount, and that those tax incentives and those loopholes where we're not actually collecting all that premium tax is considered and weighed in the calculations as we go forward. Because, you know, we were told that we would get a certain amount in premium tax, and then we did not get that actual amount. So it's got to be very clear that those loopholes are closed and that it's directed towards where it's supposed to be directed. Because we've been told things before in the past in this legislative body that have not come to fruition. And that needs to be very clear on not just that issue, but on any other issue as we go forward, particularly as it relates to contracts and how they're written. I just want to say that so that we have very clear knowledge. Because when we passed different aspects of the private options and premium taxes were initially guaranteed and suggested, there was not discussion about the tax incentives on those premium taxes. Thank you.
Representative Ferguson, you're recognized.
I do that every time I push the button, sorry. I just have a request, because several committee members have said if one of the full managed care fails, that they would vote for the Diamond Plan. So I didn't know if we could vote separately on those, because there are people that might vote for both depending on the outcome of the first.
So you want
They're
to,
not mutually exclusive, I don't think. Yeah.
okay,
And we might want to send both to the legislature.
we're gonna report out, okay, I guess what I would ask you is, and I think to Representative Mead's comment, regardless of what this task force does, I don't think we're gonna have a unanimous vote on these two proposals. So more than likely, there's gonna be some give and take in the legislative process. I think right now, our job is to report out a recommendation, or if we don't have agreement on a recommendation, to report out that we couldn't agree. And so, I'll talk with the co-chair here in a minute, while we got another question or two here, and we'll try to come up with a process. I think that makes sense, but because while I don't know that you can say they're mutually exclusive, I think they are certainly different legislation that's going to have to be crafted depending on which one of those paths we go. So we'll look at that. Senator Chesterfield, do you want to comment on that?
No, sir, on the process, I would move that we divide the question between the House and the Senate.
Okay, we're not even to a vote point yet, so let's.
When you get there, sometimes you don't
Okay,
get there.
I appreciate the notice though. Okay, if you all finished your explanation of what you see
Yeah.
as these two alternatives?
Yeah, the only thing I want to add to that is, and this goes to what Senator Irwin said, is the related provisions, no matter which path you take. There is a question in there about dedication of premium tax. So I would recommend that when that comes up, that you make sure that it has the language you want, so.
And we did fix that, to clarify, we did fix that afterwards, I think in the last session, but just initially it was not considered. Thank you, I agree, thank you.
Representative Douglas, you're recognized for a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a short question. We're basing most of our discussions on the possibility or the probability that the reimbursement will stay according to the plan that we had outlined in the private option. We're hearing from, congressmen that this may jump to 75% reimbursement. What is the plan for Arkansas if we no longer have a 95 or, percent reimbursement, but we just get right to 75 when they realize, we just cannot handle the debt that we are accumulating with the present plan? Do you have other states that you're looking at? How do you unwind this if you suddenly jump to 75% reimbursement? What is the plan for Arkansas if that happens next year?
Yes, so the answer to that would be, we're gonna have triggers in the forthcoming legislation, the same way we had triggers in the prior legislation, that if Congress changes the laws, and those changes have an effect on us, and it could be, as you described, changing the reimbursement rates, or it could be some other change. For example, let's say Congress repeals Obamacare in its entirety, then we would also have triggers so that we could do different things. So the legislation will address those things, and all of the direction forward is based on existing federal law.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I've just been consulting with staff. Thanks, Senator Chesterfield. We can, if we want to divide the House, it is a motion that can be made, and just like any other motion, it takes a majority of the quorum to pass the motion. Some of the things we have to be aware of here, though, is when you do that, you take the amount required to pass from basically 9 to 10, because you have to pass it on both the House and the Senate side. And the other thing that you have to be aware of is, particularly since we have two different proposals here, I think it's going to get very confusing if we start trying to select one on a divided House. So more than likely, if we are going to if the motion to divide the House passes, I would suggest that then we vote them separate. Okay, so I don't really care which way we do this, but here's where we are right now. Is if the motion to divide the House does not pass, then we're just going to have a roll call, and people are going to select 1 or 3, and we're going to report out if it passes, which will take 9 votes, that it passed. If it didn't, we'll report out what the vote is in our committee report. So I know I can see a lot of confused faces looking at me, so I guess what I would tell you right now is I understand Senator Chesterfield has made a motion to consider to vote this divided. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no.
No.
Okay, call a roll. I'm not doing that.
I withdraw the motion, it was clear that the majority.
Okay, the motion's been withdrawn.
Well, never mind,
The motion has been unwithdrawn, so call the roll.
Senator Chesterfield,
Yes.
Senator Rayburn,
Dismayne. Senator Ingram. Aye. Senator Sanders. Senator Cooper. Representative Hammer. Representative Meeks.
No.
Representative Farrar.
No.
He unwithdrew it, so we're voting. That's right. Withdrew the withdrawal.
Representative Farrar.
Yes.
Representative Ferguson. Representative Gray. Representative Boyd.
Yes.
House Vice Chair Murdock. House Chair Collins. Senate Vice Chair Bledsoe. Senate Chair Collins.
In our typical display of unity, the motion fails 8-0. So now, members, we are going to, we're going to call the roll. And you see the slide up there. I don't want there to be any confusion on this because this is a major decision. I would ask that the members, when their name is called, to say either number 1, governor recommendation, or number 3, Diamond Care recommendation with risk. Okay, Senator Rayford, and then Fisher Butler.
I do have a question on that process, because what is, if we're all going to just call out a number, are you then just taking whichever number receives the commensurate vote?
Well, basically, we're doing, because you can't, at least what I've been told is these two are going to be it's going to be hard for both of these to be approved and for DLR to know what to do, and for us to have guidance on where we're going here. So we are going to have to select one of these others. The other way we can do this is we can vote on one. If it gets 9 votes, it passes. We vote on the other, if it gets 9 votes, it passes. But the result is going to be the same. What we're going to do is members need to select whether or not they support either of those recommendations. Or you can say, I don't support either of them. But just as that motion took 9 votes to pass, so will any recommendation. If it's going to be a recommendation of the task force, it's going to take 9 votes to pass. Okay? Representative Hammer, you're recognized.
Just a question before we go to the vote. Are you calling the Senate side first, or is that a big deal now?
They have a process they go through. I think they call the Senate, then the House, then the vice chairs, and the chairs.
Okay, just want to make sure what the process is. Thank you.
Any other questions? We've worked a year to get to this point. Okay. Let's call, so again, members, you're going to have to speak out loud, so I'm not going to make everybody push their mics. Just say whether number 1, governor's recommendation, number 3, Diamond Care. All right, call the roll.
Senator Chesterfield.
Number 3.
Senator Rayford. Senator Dismayne.
1.
Senator Ingram. 3. Senator Sanders. Senator Cooper.
3.
Representative Hammer.
1.
Representative Meeks. 1. Representative Farrar.
3.
Representative Ferguson. Representative Gray. Representative Boyd.
3, Diamond Care.
Vice Chair Murdock. Vice Chair Murdock. Chair Collins.
Number 1.
Vice Chair Bledsoe. City Chair Henry.
Okay, members, what we have is the motion, neither one of these is going to come out as a recommendation. We have 8 for number 1, we have 7 for number 3, and we have 1 not voting. So what this means is we will get to work as legislators and kick this to them, because at least for right now, there's not consensus. There is consensus that we're going to do something with regard to these savings, and perhaps, as Representative Meeks mentioned, we can come up with some common ground between now and the special session. But the bottom line is, while we all have agreement that one of these methods needs to move forward, there is not consensus on which one of those methods it is. It was an 8 to 7 to 1 not voting. Okay, members, what we'd like to do here, I would like to go till 4 o'clock, and we've got about 25 recommendations, and I've asked Mr. Stephen to give us the ones that he considers to be a priority. Some of these things may require legislation for the special session, regardless of how this resolves itself on managed care or managed fee-for-service. We need to look at these recommendations, and if there's legislation required, we need to be prepared to weigh in on those as well. So, Mr. Stephen, you are recognized to press on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What we've done here is we put from beginning at A, letter A on down, the ones that required legislative action as the first one. So I think we go somewhere from A to K where legislative action is required. The first, you want me to just go through each one? A is one that we can start with. Do you all have your Word document?
Show us what that document looks like again so we can get it pulled out.
It should be on the status report that we gave to BLR, and then section 3, it's entitled Related Provisions for Traditional Medicaid Managed Reform.
Got it.
It should be on the Word document, it's not on the PowerPoint.
Got it. It's on the one that says confidential and...
And
I
it
guess
just
what I
was
would
too
do-
comprehensive for the slides, so I wanted to make sure you have it in front of you.
What I would like to do is go through these, and we'll make a decision after you give an explanation of each one, whether it's something we feel like we can dispatch now or need to push off to the March 29th.
Okay. The first one is really about the assumptions that we feel are really important in both models. So this is important to you all, because if some of these assumptions are not contained in the legislation, and what you're doing here now in related provisions is really starting to construct major legislative transformation for Medicaid reform. Whichever path you go down, this is what you've all been here to work for, and it's one of your mandates. So the key assumptions in this particular question are the ones that are basically contained in the evaluation report that we gave to the task force the last month. And it's very important that those bulleted items take a vote of approval or confidence. Efficient DHS project management, including timely deliverables. This goes to somewhat of Senator Chesterfield's question too, and making sure oversight's there. Expeditious legislative review on rules and streamlining through the process. If you don't have that, we're going to have delays and the timelines aren't going to be met. Changes to the Medicaid Fairness Act. We believe strongly on, especially on the evidence-based practices for behavioral health. There are limited changes that need to be made. We've met with some of the providers on those changes. Without those changes, you're going to have problems in the behavioral health side needing the savings. There needs to be rules, state plan, and waiver changes. Rate changes. By rate changes, we're talking about some of the aspects of the rates that we've talked about have to be looked at. Now, whether that's in legislation, that may not have to be, but there definitely is going to need to be something if you want to target a premium tax, for example. Technology changes to the legacy system are going to have to be in place in order to meet the timeline. Richard has mentioned at length the RSPMI benefit savings. There's actually an RSPMI specific question. And then appropriate provider risk. This is really important if you go down the road of Diamond Care as well. And I want to underscore that, because if you go to Diamond Care, The providers have no risk today. There's no real risk. So you're not having folks that are all having something to bring to the table, working together to meet quality and savings. Timely and focused legislative review. And then we put here the Pregnant Women and Children Program, expanding PCMH. Where today, certain segments of the PCMH program do not cover some of the higher cost pregnant women and children today. And that would mean that you'd need some type of action. That might not necessarily need legislation. But that's an assumption that we built into our evaluation plan and our savings. That some of those populations that are higher cost would be brought into that PCMH program. So you can divide those out, but those are just really saying these assumptions that were contained in the TSG evaluation report we were given last month to meet the targeted savings, you agree with. It's not agreeing with specific legislative language yet. That is something, Senator, you would have to work on.
So I guess, do you feel like there is enough beef here for BLR to take this and draft legislation that would do what we're talking about here?
Absolutely. And some of the items won't need legislation, but the ones that do, there's definitely enough here that we can absolutely work with them to bring something back to you.
Are these items that would be different depending on which of the two paths we take forward?
They're the same. They would be the same in both paths.
Okay, Representative Hammer, you recognize.
John, do you think there'd be any benefit, and maybe the chairs can chime in on this, I think one thing that's critical on all the things that are going on is our timetable that we're operating on, and every day that we wait, we push it back. Who knows how many more days beyond that? One day doesn't necessarily equate to one day, it could turn into 1 month on the backside. Do you think you could put, if the chairs would allow, and if the chairs feel this is a reasonable request, a timeline that shows us that even when we make a decision, or from the time we make a decision, how does that trigger other events so we know what kind of backdoor date we're up against?
I mean, I think that it's inherent in here, appropriate timely legislative review, that we could write in some specific deadlines if you'd like. But, you know, to do that, you have to be real careful, but I think it's something we can do. The only thing I think is important here is that there be a message to the department that this is not something we want you to sit back and wait until April on. For example, timely state plan changes. Work with the providers today. Start getting something together. So this is going to be all put into the package. So it's really important that this be looked at and hopefully passed.
Well, the only reason I said that was because you just made a statement that time is critical. If we don't come out with a recommendation, and we know there's a special session that's coming, but you got to have something to have a special session about too, that if we don't get it worked out by then, that's going to be kind of a potential situation. So I'm just thinking that a time frame would maybe be helpful to some of us to see the importance of getting this decision moved down the line. Thank you.
Senator Chesterfield, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Stephen, do you already have model legislation that's available for some of these pieces that we're talking about? Or would they have to be Arkansas specific?
Most of it would be Arkansas specific. The Medicaid,
Predicated on what you've learned in other places, is that right?
yeah, some of it's going to be, correct.
So we have some model legislation from other places?
Yes.
That would help drive
Yep,
this,
absolutely.
more facilitate this process?
Absolutely.
All right, thank
We
you.
would look at that. Yep.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ferrari, you recognize.
John, I did hear you say that these recommendations don't require, I mean, it doesn't matter if we go managed here or ASI. So we can start on these quickly.
That's the important part here, correct.
Okay, so we really need to get these out no matter which way we go on the other.
Yeah, I mean, if you signal today that you want the state plan change and you're gonna put into law that the Department of Human Services shall amend the state plan to include some of the later items as well, that's gonna send a message for them to start working on that, correct?
Right, and then right now, they're on, DHS is on hold until we have a recommendation.
On a lot of things, they're on hold. But they're starting to meet with providers, they're starting to look forward to some of the stuff that's gonna pass, but they don't know. But if you say, you know, some of these areas, once you pass, I think that's gonna give them the impetus to start really working on it. I mean, the Medicaid Fairness Act, for example, that draft can be shared with providers tomorrow. that can start to be put together and given to BLR. So there are some aspects here that can actually get moving into the legislative process.
Mr. Chair, is there any way that we can get this process voted on these?
Yeah, and that's the purpose of this. Unless there's objection, what I would like to do on any of these is authorize BLR to turn these into legislation for review at the 29th. So I'm not gonna ask for a recommendation to support these because who knows what the legislation is gonna actually look like when we get it. So, but unless there's an objection to these that require legislation as we review them, I would basically ask Jill and Marty and the team to turn this into legislation that we'll try to get in your hands again a week before the meeting or so that we can then discuss them on the 29th.
All right, thank you.
Senator Irvin, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, as I was the sponsor of the Medicaid Fairness Act, and so we've actually already started those discussions. I mean, so that's already happening, I think, with the provider community. I just wanted to chime in that we've already started that process on Medicaid Fairness Act, and I've been part of it since I was a sponsor.
Okay. Any other discussion on item A? And again, what I would like from the members is, if there's not objection, ask BLR to turn these into legislation for review, again, hopefully a week prior to our next meeting. Okay, let's go on to the next one.
Section B, we can pass because that is one of the only ones here that is dependent upon a vote for managed care. If you were to vote for managed care, then you'd be looking at voting on B. B should be voted on if you go down the road of managed care.
Okay, and again, this is one that, depending upon the direction of the legislature, if managed care is utilized, then we would need profit control legislation.
Yeah,
So
I guess, yes, just let me step back. Dental, you have agreed dental managed care. So this could apply to dental. So I think what this says is basically, I think this, Representative Ferguson, you had brought up the MLR and the experience rebate question. This is a more broad question, and this question probably covers exactly the concerns you have. But this should be voted on anyways, because you want to make sure if you go down the road of dental capitated managed care, that you do not allow, or that there's a certain amount of these profits that go beyond a certain amount, actually, get rebated back to the state. And
Okay.
that's what this is about.
And again, similar to the vote on Arkansas Works, I want members to be clear that while we may ask for legislation to be drafted to support managed care, that's not necessarily, a vote to allow legislation to be drafted does not mean we're going to managed care. So, is there an objection to having legislation drafted for this one as well, item B, that we can review at the next meeting? Okay?
Okay? C is care coordination for high-cost pregnant women and children. And that's really, one of the assumptions is to do this anyways. C is just taking your population that's not in the PCMH program today, and then it becomes a question of, do you put those into the managed fee-for-service, or do you move those into capitated managed care? So C says, we are going to move that population into whatever model we decide.
So I guess on one like that, you're gonna have to perhaps draw like two different pieces of legislation, because it will depend upon which of those paths we pursue.
Well, I get, no, it actually can, if you don't go, yeah, I'm assuming you're gonna go down one of the paths, so
Right,
yes.
right, okay.
Yes.
So again, BLR need to kind of take notes on these things, and some of these may have to have a or B type bill. Representative Ferguson, you recognize.
Yes, I do have a question about the qualified independent entity aspect.
Yep.
Why would that not just be done by an obstetrician? I mean, today obstetricians decide if it's a high-risk pregnancy and refer appropriately.
Really, this population here is subsequent to those types of primary care visits. This issue is when they are in today, the PCMH cap, they've gone beyond the cap, and or they're exempted through either some of the neonatal cases we showed you, either the high cost at the very beginning. It's taking those populations and moving them into a more of a complex care coordination program. So we felt that you either want to move those into the independent managed fee-for-service model, or you'd want to have those cared for under the capitated managed care program model. So it's the real high cost population that continues to grow, have issues with their health and grow the cost, but aren't being coordinated in terms of the care today.
I guess I'm just wondering why pregnant women, why that evaluation, would not typically be done by an obstetrician.
It would be, but we're talking, Steve, you've looked at some of the data here, if you want to answer that. It's more of the complex cases that go beyond just that visit, so that there's been complications, and there continue to be complications, and there needs to be additional examination and review. And some of those costs have gone up real high, so they're not currently in the BCMH program. So maybe if you want to put something in there to say that they could actually, certain cases can stay within the obstetrician, I think that serves the intent of what this is about. It's just keeping them out of the BCMH program today is not something that is of interest to your state, in our opinion. To furthering the value of your population health.
I think what happens to most of these high-risk pregnancies today is they're followed by UAMS through telemedicine, through Dr. Lowry's department. Would that prohibit this?
No. Again, remember, this is mostly geared towards, we're talking about Section C, but if you look at the language itself, it's mainly geared towards those high-cost neonatal cases and the ones that we had identified early on that are not in any complex care management program today. That's all we're talking about here.
Okay.
Okay, so without objection, we'll ask for legislation to be drawn up for item C. Okay. Senator Chesterfield, you recognize me.
Chair, would it be unreasonable to just draw up legislation for all of them, and then we could vote on what we want to,
Are you going to go home, is that it?
Not that I'm in a hurry or anything, but I'm just wondering if we're planning on.
Did you state that in a motion, Senator? All right, here's what I guess, how many of these do we have that require legislation?
I think we go up to K.
All right.
Whatever the will of the chair is.
No, I think it's, I guess what I would agree with that. I think there is absolutely no harm in us moving forward with legislation on all these items, because we certainly will then have something much more detailed to fight about, so. So if there's no objection, we're just going to ask them to go ahead and draw up legislation through K, through all the ones that require legislative action. And that way we can review legislation instead of just these paragraphs, which you've already, I'm sure, read because we've had them for a week. So is there objection to that? Senator Irvin, you're recognized for a question.
So I just wanted under E to add something in E, which is the independent Medicaid provider rate review. Could we compare not just across the state lines, but that also include comparisons with private insurers, rates paid, and providers, and what the cost of providing the service is, so that you have a more rounded picture there. That's all. I just wanted to add that language to that recommendation, so that was a more full comparison. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, we can do that.
Thank you, I
Okay.
don't object to anything else. Thank
Does
you.
anybody have any other things that stuck out on that they would like to have asked to be considered? Yes, Representative Gray recognized.
Thank you. I just had two things. As I read through this, we referenced, or you referenced other states quite a few times. I personally would, and this may just be me, but I would personally not like to see other states referenced as a model.
Yeah, the only reason I do that, and we wouldn't do that in the legislation, it was just to give you an idea of what we were talking about when that was written. So I agree with you.
Okay, and then the one last comment I had was on D, nursing facility providers. It says at the bottom, and they're the only ones that I think we did this on, so it says after 3 full years of implementation, it's independently verified that the plan has not produced $150 million in savings. The task force recommends that DHS move forward on capitated full risk. The only issue I have with that, and I don't know, they may have agreed with that or not, I don't know, but we can't bind a future legislature. So that's my only concern, is that would bind a future legislature.
Well, it could be written as a recommendation then, because moving to full risk managed care does not require legislation. The governor can do that on his own through the executive powers. What this is basically saying then is to the executive, go forward unless the legislature stops it. So on capitated managed care.
Okay.
So we can rewrite it to make sure it doesn't have, I understand what you're saying, it won't be legislation that is enacted. But you're saying we recommend the governor move forward with executive, with capitated full risk if a trigger isn't met within a certain period of time.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
I
recognize the
I would just add to that, to visit with BLR, because we do have provisional parts of legislation that says in the event that this occurs and this occurs. Now, obviously, a future legislature can come in and change that. But I do think it's important if we're gonna have a deal, if there be consequences of that, terms of that deal are not met. So, Representative Mayberry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't see anything in the recommendations addressing this and didn't know if it could be addressed in some way, but we have a lot of people who use outside of our state hospitals and providers, especially those that live along the border or perhaps a doctor that they could not find in Arkansas. And I just want to make sure that those families could still use those doctors or those providers or that hospital. And I don't see it being addressed in what's here, and I know that it is something that will come up and needs to be addressed.
Y'all can just take a look at any limitations or restrictions that we might need to adjust.
Yep.
We do have a lot of folks who live along the borders of other states. Representative Ferguson, you're recognized.
Sorry, I do have a request for a change on E. I think to base the rates on other states is a little unpredictable. Maybe a better language would be to say that it's based on commercial payers' rates. Usually Medicaid rates are a percentage of commercial payers. I mean, what other states pay can be pretty unpredictable, but if you base it on the cost of providing services and what commercial carriers pay, and it's a percentage of that, I think that's a better formula.
Isn't that what Senator Irvin said, that we would include private insurance pay in that review as well?
I don't see that on
Well,
here.
it's not in here, but
No,
we've had.
we've included it.
Oh, you did,
Yep.
I'm sorry, okay.
See, I was listening. Okay. I can tell that the members have lost interest, and so,
There was one at the end that Representative Ferguson mentioned to me during the break about the Centers of Excellence. And if that's not gonna be something you want on here, we should know about that now before we do a lot of work writing up the legislation.
which one are you talking about? Z? It's not legislation required, so let's just put that up, we'll consider that up in March 29th meeting. I'm just trying to get the ones,
Okay.
so BLR can get started drawing up some bills. Senator Bledsoe, push your button. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the Medicaid Fairness Act, I'm concerned about the way that might be drafted. Will I have an opportunity to?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, I actually have draft language that we work with the providers on,
all right.
and so I have that, and I'll share that with you. But it's something I want to share with BLR to make sure it's compatible with what your intent is too. So yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and members, I would just ask you, as soon as we get the legislation, we will make sure that the task force members get it. And when you see things that you would like to have adjusted, or make sure that you include the entire task force so we can have those discussions. But at the end of the day, obviously, it's going to come through the appropriate committees in the legislature, and everybody will have their opportunity to adjust when it is necessary. Representative Murdoch.
Thank you, Chairman. The Medicaid Bill of Rights that I was handed earlier, will that, John, will that be made a part of something that you put together as a possible supplement?
I mean, we didn't think of that, but whatever your suggestion is, we could look at it. I mean, we weren't gonna change that Bill of Rights, but we could put that into the language if you'd like, that indicates that that Bill of Rights still remains in effect.
Well, because what it does
Is there a concern? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
well, just making sure, I mean, it addresses the recipients, the provider, as well as the state rights, so as long as that's inclusive, I guess it's fine.
Yeah, no, I know that, but I'm wondering, is there a reason for you bringing this up that you want anything changed on that?
No.
Okay, because our intention is not to change that.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Members, we're gonna have a bunch of legislation for you to begin to review here in the next couple of weeks. And, I wanna thank you all again for a lot of work over the last year. And as Senator Disming said earlier, unfortunately, the work's really just starting. We've got a lot more to do as we begin to, whichever path we end up finally going down. But having said that, do we have any other items? We've got the HDC task force, so Senator Raper will be working with, President Hammer to get a meeting of that, going. And we meet again on March the 29th, and we'll have some legislation to review. Thank you all again. We are adjourned.